I'm going to show you an exercise I think is very useful. Now what you do is you stand up, so please rise. That's something I used to get a lot of back pain and fevers, and Lord only knows what. And every morning felt like nothing on earth. So what somebody told me to do, in fact they gave me a piece of paper that illustrated this technique, is to stand upright, let feet slightly apart as you do in Tai Chi, and starting from the straight down, keep your hands down straight, and just lift them. And just lift them. And just lift them, and kind of flick them up. And then let them fall back and flick them up at the back. I try and make it natural. Not too fast. Keep yourself straight and concentrate more or less on this area as you do in Tai Chi. Now if you do that a sufficient number of times every day, and you do it properly, and I promise you, you're going to feel a lot different. If you have some problem with your back, or you suffer from excessive fevers, you get headaches a lot, this will disappear. It's an ancient Chinese technique. It came from a monk originally. You have to do it properly. It must feel more or less natural. So you need to be patient. Just let your arms swing. Keep yourself nice and straight, and don't let your mind wander. So fix your attention around here. You should feel that burning sensation possibly in your hands also eventually. Now I've started doing 400 of these every morning. These days I do more than that. I usually do it for about half an hour. You may not have the patience to do that, but if you can do it for half an hour, you'll get much more benefit. And if you do it properly, remember to bring your hands up at the end of the upswing and up at the end of the backswing. But try and make it a sort of natural thing. Okay? I'll show you again before I leave. I think you'll find it useful. I'll put this thing back on now. So let's look at some of the problems that will stop people from achieving this kind of success as a meditator, because there are basically 5 categories. They're known as Nīvaraṇā, which is very close to nirvana or nibbana, but it's quite the opposite. They're called obstacles or hindrances. The translation of the word Nīvaraṇā is hindrance, but obstacle is just as good, because they're the things you have to get over or around somehow if you're going to make the mind become concentrated to the point where it just becomes one thing. It focuses on one object only, absorbs into it, becomes fully concentrated. To do that, you need to overcome what they call the 5 Nīvaraṇā. Now these are also referred to by Buddhists as defilements, which are like pollutions. Like pollution in water makes water impure, therefore undrinkable, unusable in a normal way. Then the defilements or pollutions, they make the mind, in a sense, unusable in the same way. It can still function, but it doesn't function properly. And whatever we do in our lives is distorted. Whatever we experience is misunderstood, because our minds do not function properly. They've been polluted. Now, how have they been polluted? Well, right from the beginning of our lives, we tend to react to the experiences of life in a particular way. We become very quickly enamored of the delightful and stimulating, the exciting. We're not too interested in life as it just basically is. We like to have it spiced up. This is something that starts very early in life, and we quickly develop a habit of seeking these kind of experiences. The world we live in is an obvious reflection of this, particularly Hong Kong, but Bangkok is even worse. Any of the big cities, of course, are full of the mental stimulants that human beings like to indulge in. I'm not talking about drugs, at least not obvious drugs, but if you think about anything that we do, watching movies, watching sporting events, reading books, reading poetry if you like to do that, listening to music, smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, drinking wine, drinking Coca-Cola, drinking coffee and tea, which I'm as guilty of as anybody. So on and so forth. The list is endless. All these are consumer commodities. They're produced as a response to human need. We love to be stimulated. We're not happy to drink water, which is there for that purpose. Well, drink it, yes, but it has to be purified first, and then it doesn't taste of anything. So if it's a can of Coca-Cola, you're probably going to drink the can of Coca-Cola instead, because it's full of chemicals and it's fizzy. And it's stimulating. It might destroy your teeth and shine up your insides, and when you die, your corpse will stay in the ground for 5,000 years. It will never rot away. So in a way, it's a kind of good thing, I suppose. That's our problem. We tend to seek stimulation, and so we develop these things called defilements. The language I'm going to use is a little inaccurate, but at this level it's not that important. To get the understanding across is more important. The subconscious area of the mind stores up these things called defilements, and they come from our activities. We seek the stimulating. We don't just wait for it, we look for it. And the older we get, the more sophisticated we get in the ways and means that we acquire things that delight and stimulate us. Now these have effects in that they leave traces in the subconscious. And the seeking of stimulation creates what they call a defilement, a root defilement. The Pali word is akusala mula, an unskillful root defilement called greed. The Pali term is lobha. Greed is lust, and it motivates the desire to get, but not to get what we need, what we should want, but the things that we really don't need, but we do want, the stimulating things. At the same time, you're developing the desire to have, to get. There's also going to be the desire to not have is going to be associated with that. It's like two sides of a coin or a banknote. You can't have one without the other. And so while you're desiring to get stimulation, you're desiring to avoid that which is not stimulating. And so you develop quite naturally another defilement called dosa or tosa, which is aversion. Sometimes hatred, sometimes they say anger, but anger is a different word. I think aversion is better. The desire to get away from something, to not have to deal with something. So all our desires are motivated by these two root defilements. They're very unskillful things. They keep us always away from functioning naturally. One makes us always function in a way that we seek stimulation. And so we become kind of enslaved to the modern consumer society, which takes very skillful advantage of this human problem, of course. There's nothing sinister about that. This is just how business works. At the same time, there's something else going on in the mind. We're not born with knowledge as small children. When we come into the world, we're ignorant. We don't have any knowledge. Now, ignorance isn't stupidity. It's just a lack of the sort of knowledge we need if we're going to function properly as human beings and develop ourselves completely into Buddhas or Buddha-like people. This we never normally do because we don't have knowledge of how to do that. We don't, for instance, know anything about how we should react to the world we're experiencing. We don't know that if we react in certain ways, it's going to create underground tendencies or habits of mind, those defilements. And these will then dominate us and force us to experience life in a certain way and bring us lots of problems because of that. We don't know what we are. We don't know how we should respond. And this is basically ignorance. We don't have any knowledge of how to function as a human being. What they call this is not ignorance, but delusion. The word is moha, and it's a third of the root defilements, and is really the base of the other two. Without moha, there would be no lobha, greed, there would be no aversion, dosa. Because moha is there from birth, we're simply born with it. It's like the granddaddy of all ignorance. Ignorance itself is a moving process. It's something that enters the conscious levels of the mind and mingles with any experience. Like when you smoke, you know you shouldn't do it because it's not good for your health, but you can ignore it easily because ignorance enters to allow you to do that. But delusion is a static force. It sits in the subconscious and comes onto the conscious levels, as does greed and aversion. They tend to dominate us. They make us function in certain ways. So when you come to meditate, you want to sit and watch your breathing, and you sit down. First meditation session is really very easy. You think, well, this is simple. Of course, you're not doing it properly. But the second meditation session, your mind starts to rebel because, come on, this is not the thing I've been experiencing for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Suddenly you're giving the mind bread and water, where you've been giving it pizza and all sorts of things before, and now it's not happy. It doesn't want this. And so it wants to go the other place where its stimulation is. It doesn't want to stay with the breathing. And so your mind wanders. It goes into the past, it goes into the future, it thinks about this, it thinks about anything but the breathing. And after a few sessions, you can't even watch half a breath. Why? Because you've lived the way you have, like all of us. Me included, of course. My early life was all like this. In fact, I lived this way until my mid-30s when I began to get a bit more sensible, but not much more. And when I became a monk, okay, I had to be more sensible, so I took it more seriously. And now I know that living in a balanced, quiet, restrained way, although I don't always do this because I have many things to do which make it difficult, produces a very quiet mental environment. I have less mental disturbance, less anxiety, less fear, less of all the things that most of us carry around throughout our lives because of the way we operate, the way we live in nature. This is the problem. We have habits of mind which are very deep-rooted, and when we try to go in the opposite direction from the one we've been going in, you might go to a retreat. It's very difficult to fix the mind on an object and to keep it there because the mind just wants to go somewhere else. We just call it a wandering mind. The Pali word is uddhacca. Now there are medicines, or you can cure this. If you sit and your mind wanders, what do? To get rid of it, to stop it, to slow it down, you use long breathing. This is what's known as the antidote meditation for the wandering, the uddhacca mind, the monkey mind, the mind that jumps around and won't stay still. You take its energy out by forcing it to observe long breathing. Now, like all the antidote meditations I'm going to talk about, this is not a simple thing to do, but we have a head start on most meditation teachers here. Buddhadasa was very wise. He recognized this problem, of course, and he saw that long breathing is beneficial for relaxing the body. It also relaxes the mind. Of course it does. Therefore, you practice long breathing. For you to practice long breathing to drive away the monkey mind is quite a simple business. This is why when you sit down and start anapanasati with long breathing, why it's so essential to do that. Because the wandering mind is the most obvious of what they call the hindrances and Nīvaraṇāni, and often the most difficult to control for people who don't know about it. So this is in itself useful information, something we should know. The mind is going to wander, but we can do something about it if we have the patience, if we develop the skill. We can make our breath very long, depending on how much wandering the mind's doing. The longer the breathing will be, the more controlled it is, the more the mind will settle on that breathing. It will take time, of course. Nothing happens in 10 seconds. But if you're patient, you can overcome the wandering mind successfully. You can also observe the wandering mind if you don't want to make your breathing long in this way, which is the obvious and easiest way to do it. But you can observe the mind wandering. You can sit. But what you need to do is just let the mind do its tricks, perform its tricks, run here, run there, but don't get involved with anything that it comes up with. The mind will imagine things, will remember things, and try to remember things which are pleasing and stimulating. You just sit and observe this process going on. You don't indulge in anything that is pleasing or stimulating. So if the mind remembers some event in your life which was very meaningful to you, which is very important, and which always makes you feel pleased and delighted, then you should just sit and observe the mind trying to play with that experience, but don't get involved. Don't feel delight. Don't get involved with it. And that's very difficult to do, but if you can do it, it tends to be the most skillful way to deal with the wandering mind. But it's not an easy thing to do. If your mindfulness is good enough, you could perhaps achieve that kind of skill level quite quickly. But it's best in the beginning to stick with long breathing when you're dealing with the wandering mind, because it's much safer to do that. Supposing you feel tired and sleepy and energyless, your mind has no energy. You want to meditate, or it's time to meditate, but you feel, oh no. It's a very common feeling, oh no. So one of the things you can do is meditate every day, but don't always meditate at the same time. Because then you might always have, oh no, what time is it? Oh God. All right, sit down for now. You're watching the clock more than you're watching your breathing. I mean, you have to have some desire to meditate to have any hope of success. I've been through all this, believe me, so many times. It's painfully obvious how it works. Again, it's coming from the same source. Stimulation seeking is what makes us into the creatures we are. And now you don't want to seek stimulation. Part of you doesn't want to, but of course the defilements do. And they're still there. You haven't got rid of them. You haven't even weakened them much yet. So you have to somehow overcome that feeling. The mind might wander, or it might just be bored. The even thought of meditation drains the energy out of the mind. You just feel bored, uninterested. This is called thīna-middha, sloth and torpor, mental dullness and drowsiness. You feel drowsy mentally, you feel drowsy physically. You sag down. You see retreatants at Suamo leaning against a pillar. There's nothing wrong with leaning against things, but not when They're just dying to go somewhere. And even the hard concrete slab they give you to sleep on in the retreat center in the monastery, even that, and the wooden pillow. I mean, this is torture. But even that is, the thought of that is delicious. When you feel this way, anywhere but sitting here in the hot, in the heat and the mosquitoes, and, it's a horrible feeling to have, but it comes from our behavior. You're denying the mind its usual escapes, and so it's not interested. It's just like a naughty child. It won't cooperate. It just sulks, like a little girl would when she doesn't get what she wants, pouting in a corner. So you have to wake it up somehow. So the best way to do it is to change the meditation technique and to leave the breathing and to bring your mind to something more interesting, perhaps, which is visualizing things. And what the Buddhists say is that the way to wake the mind up, the best way to do it, and the most skillful way to do it, the least dangerous way to do it, is to visualize an object which is bright. The mind is dark and sleepy and bored and lazy, so you need to bring some light into it, to sharpen it up, to kindle a little interest. So change the meditation technique. Now the way you do this is you visualize an object which is going to be light. It's going to cause the mind to brighten. Not easy to do. A candle flame is good. So if you meditate with a candle flame, this is not a bad idea. You could light a candle when you sit down, and if you do feel sleepy, you can use the candle flame to brighten the mind. How do you do it? You simply stare at it. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, but you do. Until your eyes begin to sting a little bit. Then you close your eyes and you try and retain the image of the candle flame. Now already when you begin to do that, the mind is already developing a little interest because it's different. And a candle flame is kind of pretty. Now if you do it until it disappears, and that disappears alarmingly quickly. So you open your eyes and you stare at it again until your eyes sting, and you close them once more, and you keep on doing this. Now you won't be able to retain the candle flame. You will if you keep on doing it long enough. The mind will retain the image of the candle flame once it ceases to be bored and once it's not wandering. This reflection, the mind will reflect the candle flame and will retain it for quite a long time. But that's not the point. The point is to wake the mind up, and this is one of the prime ways of doing it. A candle flame is good because it's not dangerous. An electric light is perhaps a little bit too bright. Something that's bright but not scintillating. You could look outside like now. It's quite light if you look through the window. It's quite bright. Just visualize something. I mean, Hong Kong's not too good. It's full of buildings and not much else. What you want is a tree with green leaves, because that's a beautiful thing to look at. So you look at a tree and you stare at just a bunch of leaves, and then close your eyes and visualize the leaves. So maybe if you have a plant in the room, that would be good. Or a light, a candle flame would be excellent. And whenever you meditate, you can always light a candle flame before you begin to meditate. So you can focus on that. That will wake the mind up because it will kindle interest, and it will also brighten the mind. It will make the mind a little brighter and dispel the feeling of dullness and drowsiness to some extent. You need to make an effort. It won't happen just like that, but it will happen if you persevere. You can stop sitting if you're sitting and walk a little bit. Not so good. The candle flame is probably the best I can think of at the moment. I usually, although I don't suffer a lot from this, when I've tended to use bunches of leaves because I like green things anyway. Sunlight coming through a tree, coming from above. If you look up and you see those sunlit leaves, it's a very pretty thing to look at anyway, but it's not particularly stimulating. And it is quite easy to retain that image. It works very well. You could meditate on a cliff, the edge of a cliff, so if you fall asleep, you die. Now, this comes from a very famous meditation master called Ajahn Chah. He didn't mean, he was joking, of course, but the Westerners who went to ordain with him are mostly a humorless crowd, totally unmusical, have no sense of rhythm, the usual thing, covered in hair, very tall, bone white, never done anything really interesting in their lives. Of course, he knew that, so he was always taking the mickey out of these people. Well, go meditate on the edge of a well, a deep well, then you won't fall asleep, because if you do, you'll fall in. I don't know if any of them ever actually did it. Anyway, it got in a book, they took it seriously, but he was actually joking. I mean, nobody would tell people to meditate on the edge of a cliff, or if they make the wrong move, they're dead. No, this is obviously foolish. So I think the visualizing one is best here. There's doubt. The Pali word for doubt is vicikicca, the confused mind. You sit, but you can't, nothing is happening because you're not even certain that what you're doing is what you should be doing. The meditation technique is not in any way convincing you that it's going to work. And so you may be thinking, well, you haven't got it right, you've missed something. "5 minutes. Oh, right, if I want the Indian food, I do. I do. Anyway, doubt, there's no antidote. The mind is confused because it's not understanding something properly, and you can't do anything about it. There is no antidote to doubt. The only thing you can do is to stop your mind from thinking about something which it doesn't understand. Because doubt tends to come and go quite quickly. Now, the only doubt you can really have about this meditation practice is, what is this guy talking about? Which is doubt enough, of course. If you have it, all you can do is ask me questions. And today you can't do that because you're going to the Indian restaurant. Unless you want to come along. So doubt is the only real problem, but it's not a problem because it tends to come and go very quickly. It's not one of the more serious ones. We just got time to get through the final two. Now, we've really dealt with the ones that are most obvious for people who live in the world. The final two are sensual lust, kāmacchanda, which is mainly sexual in nature, and is very monastic, because monastics, of course, they give this up completely. And if you're young, male or female, the sap is still rising. You still have the urge to procreate, which is basically what sexual desire is when it comes right down to it. The other one is called vyāpāda. This is perhaps better to deal with this because it's the mind which is in a very unhealthy state, in the way of beginning to be irritated or angry. It's where our bad moods come from. If you wake up in the morning and you're not feeling very happy about life, it's because your mind has the base of vyāpāda, ill will is the translation. It's coming from the root defilement of aversion. Now, this is not a mood, but it's what promotes a bad mood. If you're not careful, your mood will become bad. You'll become crotchety, and you'll be very easily irritated. And when you're easily irritated, you can also be very easily made angry. The antidote meditation to this kind of thing is a practice called metta. Now, we're not at a retreat here, so it's kind of difficult, if you don't already know what metta meditation is, to do anything much with that. I didn't bring any information or booklets with me. I haven't got anything really easily to put my hands on. And I don't know what goes on in Hong Kong as regards meditation practice. But loving kindness is very much part of the Buddhist technique. It's one of what they call the Brahma Viharas. It's a question of opening your mind out somehow. When the mind is afflicted by byāpāda, it's tending to close inside itself and become a little knot of irritation, of anger. It's like a black mood of mind developing. And you can snap at people very easily with no real reason for doing that. So the idea is you need to stop that somehow, to bring your mind out of that, because there's no way you can meditate if you're beginning to feel angry. You need to open the mind out. And the idea is that you practice something called metta. Now, the only thing I can suggest in the present situation is that we all have internet connections, I'm sure. Well, just tap it in, loving kindness, or METTA, and you'll get a whole crowd of responses. The doyenne of loving kindness practice is a woman called Sharon Salzberg, who's part of works in the Barre Institute in Massachusetts, in America. She's written several books on this subject, which you'll find very useful. Bhante Gunaratana, but if you put metta into the internet search box, you will get all these things anyway. I think that's all we have time for. There's one more we could look at, but it's not perhaps so important in the lives of people who live a more worldly life. It's more monastic. But we have a few days more to work on this. But I think we can leave meditation at this point. Perhaps I'll mention that tomorrow, and maybe even look at the final part of the practice of anapanasati a little bit. What they call Dhammanupassana Satipatthana is the beginning of that is the experience of enlightenment, is described in one word. I can expand that and make it more understandable, because it will be connected with what we're going to talk about over the next few days also. So I think that's got to be the end of it for today, because the masala dosa is calling. And it doesn't need to call too loudly. So you also get a lesson in tying the rope. You can relax once more. One second. I usually wear this upside down because the material is, Thailand is very wet at times. Nothing dries, so everything gets moldy. Now, the rug is very expensive, or was. I've had it for years, but unfortunately it goes black in places. And it generally goes black around the bottom, the seam. So around the top first for some reason. So it looks as if you don't wash. The thing is disgusting. It's all black, and it's a bit that goes around your neck. And as I go out every morning with my bowl collecting food, it doesn't look too good. Thai people are not too impressed by that kind of thing. So I turn it upside down. It's okay. There's no great law about wearing the thing either way, as long as it's on your body properly. There are no buttons, no attachments. You have to roll it. They call it a roll, a loofah roll. And this is what you do. So you get to there, roughly. It should be more or less. Not too tight, not too loose. If it's too loose, it won't fit properly. And you roll it from the inside. You have to be fairly tight. Get it underneath your arm. It's going to look excessively baggy around the armpit. Give it a few twists to make sure it's fairly loose. Grab hold of that. Grab hold of that. Hold it like this. And swing it around. There you go. The arcane business of being a Theravada monk. It's also good to tie it together at the bottom in case there's a wind, or in case your lower robe falls down, which sometimes happens because we wear a belt. The belt is not elastic, you tie it. And sometimes if you don't tie it properly, it can come undone. And it's happened to me on more than one occasion. You suddenly feel your robe slipping down. Maybe you're taking food from somebody. It's an alarming experience.